Folks, thanks for coming along tonight, and thanks to the Zoomers who are on the call. So, as you know, the discussion tonight is elections 2025, and we've got two speakers. Michael Kroger here from Melbourne. Of course, as you know, Michael Kroger is the former president of the Victorian Liberal Party, or the Liberal Party of Victoria, and currently a Sky News contributor on most nights of the week, as far as I can recall. And Mary Easson, a former ALP member for Lowe in Sydney, and currently a business consultant. So we're going to start off with Mary Easson, speak for about 15 minutes, followed by Michael Kroger, about 15 minutes, questions in the discussion, and we finish just a little bit before the turn at the top of the hour. Mary, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Gerard. Good evening, everybody. You're very good coming out tonight with the weather the way it is. My voice is a little bit weak, so if I have to take a spray or take a drink of water, please excuse me. Now, this election, everyone tells me, is boring. I'm in two minds about this as to what that means. On the one hand, I like the fact that Australia is not racked with distrustful, terrible divisions, even hatreds that we see in some countries. The lack of bipartisanship and friendships across the aisle, as we are increasingly seeing in the United States, worries many of us about that country. I used to think that the test of a nation's maturity is whether its politics is relatively uninteresting, untrammelled by ideological extremes. This brings me to the second point, apart from it being a boring campaign, and that is about the campaign that I wonder if the lack of mention by both parties on key strategic issues, including defence, foreign policy and stagnation in productivity growth, calls attention to a wider political malaise. We are a long way from the Hawke, Keating, Howard years. Peter Credland, I saw in today's Australian, had a thing saying, you know, why have we got these limp decisions being among second-rate people talking about second-class issues. So clearly we're not meeting the standards that we perhaps should be. I'll come back to that point in a moment, but undoubtedly it is an interesting aspect of this election. 3 months ago, it looked as if it could be that the Liberals had it in the bag. I think we were talking about a dinner party where your husband was predicting one thing and I was saying, I think the Libs could win it. I was wrong. I heard about private polling, the cost of living pressures, that the government was on the nose. Trump changed the wider political environment. But before going there, let me make some general observations. The complacency of expectations has led to many of the opposition's difficulties today. Right now, it looks as though Labor will get there. I was amazed too, but I did my prep before doing this speech, so I've rung up everybody to find out what's happening in terms of not only polls, but the party's own polls. Some internally are speculating whether Labor can even win in its own right. I'm not going that far, but of course, apart from 1929 and 1943, Labor never wins with a huge margin. It would be foolish, however, for us to make a call that is this close with 2 weeks out from an election on May the 3rd. The electorate is fickle. The support base for both political parties is not commanding. There is almost as many others as there are committed to the majors. Labor's possible winning card is better the devil you know. This year, in the lead up to the campaign and subsequently, there have been many shifts and turns. Yet at the moment, I feel more confident for the government than I do for the opposition. The opposition was too relaxed when it should have been on high focus of its policies, their personalities and key ministers and main priorities. In the opening weeks of the campaign, a lot of the Liberals' propaganda, their media advertising, has tried to present a more humane and interesting opposition leader. They should have done that a year ago. It smells to me like they're introducing Peter Dutton to a sceptical electorate, mindful of an image problem. For the life of me, I don't know why they waited so long. Having met him several times, he's very personable, but please don't let me get carried away on that point. Polling suggests that the Labor Party will probably win the May 3rd electorate. Now, I should use the glasses, that'd be helpful. So whether it is outright or whether it's a hung parliament, suddenly we have detected a shift in popularity, personal popularity ratings of the leaders since the campaign started. Dutton's popularity has gone down and Albanese's has gone up. Albanese is rating as of yesterday in a news poll, believe it or not, showing that Albanese was the better Prime Minister by 64% to Dutton on 36. How can that be? Surprisingly, voting intentions haven't changed very much from the last election. When polls are taken before an election, people tend to treat them as if it's a referendum on government. They talk about what they dislike about the government, and they also, but when it comes down to voting during a campaign, as they've already started to do, or on election day, it's a more real choice. Who do I like better? Out of the leaders or their policies. And in some cases, it can come down to a small percentage if people follow local personalities of candidates, etc. But it's usually a fairly small one. As a comment from a bloke I saw on TV the other day from Queensland said, 3 years is not long enough to turn the ship of state around, so I'm going to give Albo another crack. The Channel 9 debate 2 days ago had Dutton declaring that he wanted to protect people, whereas Albanese declared that kindness was in his DNA and that he was being brought up to be kind and he wanted to always show kindness. This appears to be more appealing to some of our female voters. The average age, by the way, in terms of this election is actually 48 years. But we know that the younger voters, the 18 to 34-year-olds, are a very large cohort in all states. And political parties through social media have been targeting them. The older age group is often unaware of the campaign that is being run on the iPhones and the computers and tend to just observe the TV ads, the mainstream newspapers and radio, and a lot of them are commenting that they're not getting as much literature in their letterbox as they usually do. In my day of campaigning over 30 years ago, I was around in the, I ran for Hawke and also for Keating and got elected at that time. And my seat no longer exists. It is now the equivalent of what is the seat of Reid in terms of New South Wales. But in those days, what we would do is if somebody signed a petition or if they contacted our office about a particular issue, you took note of this and you direct mailed to them during the election campaign about the issues that they had raised or you knew were of concern to them. But instead, what is happening now with younger voters is they're able to target them far more precisely. They know where they live, they know what the issues are that they're talking about, and so they tend to have a greater way of accurate targeting. This explains why a number of policy directions of the major parties have been directed to those younger age groups. Certainly, for example, with the government, the free TAFE courses, 20% reduction in HECS debts, 5% deposit for housing, and if you happen to be a parent with young children, bulk billing is not available with you. This idea of these 24-hour medical centres being established is more appealing than waiting in a hospital. I noticed, however, on TV that the local member now in my area of what is Reid is Sally Situ. Now, I saw a TV ad with her the other night announcing one of these for Burwood. And also at the same time, on my computer, I get another ad that tells me from the local mayor that Sally has managed to get this for our electorate, and isn't this wonderful? But the mere fact that they were able to, I'm sure not everybody got this thing about Burwood. In other words, they're able to say what's your IP address, they know what suburb you're in, and so these are the ways that they're getting the information through to the people they believe are going to be prospective voters. Now, 50 years ago, when I was first involved in politics, Labor had a base of about 45% and so did the Liberals, and there were about 10% of people who were swinging voters. We now have a situation where we're lucky for the main parties to have about 30% each, and it's more likely to be 40% of people who are those swinging voters. Now, both political parties now are trying to keep that base but they are dependent on preferential voting system. Peter Dutton in the debate the other night, that if Labor was going to be a hung parliament, it would be a Labor Greens parliament, government. Now Albanese said no, it won't be. And I suspect he's right, because I've got to tell you, I know of nobody in the Labor Party who wants to do a deal with the Greens. And also I suspect that even if Labor does win if there is a hung parliament, I suspect there'll be so many on the crossbench that they won't have to do a deal with any particular party. I think it'll just be a situation of doing independent deals on legislation. Certainly for the House of Reps. If they're, what else? Oh, I'm sorry. Rather than a permanent agreement with one specific group. There are still 2 weeks to go in this campaign, and voters have already started voting, and timing of events such as Easter, Anzac Day and the death of the Pope, they certainly take up the media oxygen and distract from the campaign. So things can change, and it's dangerous to make predictions. But I believe that Labor will probably be there in the end. And I'm sometimes very surprised about this. As you know, there are 151 seats in the House of Reps. Labor has 77 currently. The Liberals have 53. Minor parties, Greens have 4, Central Alliance 1 and Katter's Party 1. And there are 13 independents made up of Teals and others. It is important to remember that you have to get 56 to win in your own right. So what is it about this campaign that makes it unique? Well, I think it's the elephant in the room that no one is talking about. This campaign has appeared boring in many ways, all focused on domestic issues, and yet there is a feeling of uncertainty, anxiousness, apprehension because of Trump and of the tariffs. Also questions about loyalty from him if we were under attack. Older Australians are worried about whether their superannuation will get bounced back to its previous level, and what the further economically will they be penalised. They also wonder whether a war is in the future for their children or grandchildren. And when you feel anxious, uncertain, suffering from anxiety, you tend to stick to the people you know. You stick with Elbow for another 3 years, and although I think Paul Erickson, the National Campaign Director, has done a good job, but I believe that the backdrop of Trump is what is bringing this election home for Labor. Now, look, Labor isn't perfect, and fortunately, as I'm a former member, I'm allowed to say these things. There are things, in my opinion, that they have done wrong. For example, the decision on the Middle East, where Labor has moved away from the bipartisan position. I think that it's regrettable that in our multicultural society, we appear, this is Labor, appears to have alienated both Jews and Muslims. How do you do that? And our handling of this issue is disrupting our social harmony. The rise of anti-Semitic offences were horrible. This was a war that we could not influence the outcome of, and now there is far less chance of the Palestinians getting a state. I just think it wasn't brilliant tactics when you have everybody disliking you. Also, I think because we are a multicultural country, the fact that I've had people come up to me, Indians come up to me and say, look, what if we go to war at some stage with Bangladesh? Does that mean if there are, sorry, not Bangladesh, with Pakistan, sorry. Does that mean if there are Pakistanis in an electorate, does that mean that the Labor people will vote for Pakistan against India? It's caused a lot of upheaval. We've always said to people, look, come to Australia, bring your culture, bring your food, bring everything else, but leave behind the hatred and leave behind wars. And we've managed to do that successfully until all this was unleashed. And I think any of you who remember the parade around the Opera House by the Palestinians that night is not to be forgotten. And I think further, the unease I have about this is when the Lebanese nurses, when their thing became public, a realisation that, even if they were young and they, try to think of all the excuses for them in the world, it still tells me that they talk like that at home, that that's how they think. And I'm sure they could be decent enough individuals, but they've got caught up with that sort of dialogue, and I just think that's not acceptable. Now, negative concerning the Liberal campaign. It appears that, or this is an argument that's put, that perhaps Dutton wasn't as match ready as they would have liked. Even the media are sort of complaining that he should have given more speeches and he should have been better prepared for things. However, in the most recent debate, he acquitted himself quite well, I thought. I think it was very close. But leaving announcements such as the defence of $21 billion to spend a little bit too late, seeing people have already started voting, appears to want to use the tax cut, and I think he wants to use the tax cut to pay for it, because that's about $17 billion. And you didn't see a lot of the shadow ministers. Dutton was the main show, so they've had to decide that he's the focus of the thing, and they've shown discipline in that to a large extent. But all political parties have their faults, and if you're going to support one, you need to be prepared to compromise. They will all let you down at some stage. Even Teals or individuals will let you down. Most parties are better when they're a broad church. Now, a number of talented left-wing Liberals, former ministers in the Parliament, were replaced. And unfortunately, the Teals took their spots. And all parties need to replenish their talent. Now, with regards to the final thing, I guess I'd say, is with regards to the seats. So this is how I think Labor sees it. In Tassie and South Australia, this is for the House of Reps, they're predicting no change. Labor will retain all existing seats, they believe. In Western Australia, we believe we'll hold Tangi. Bullwinkle is more of a three-way contest, so we're unsure about that. Queensland, we think we have a chance in Leichhardt because of the retiring Hinch, the member. We think that all three Greens are at risk in Brisbane, Ryan, Brisbane and Griffiths. Victorian Labor appears to be coming back from the dead. Ashton, we think, is in play for the Libs. We think we can hold Chisholm and maybe question mark with McEwen. We believe that Wills and McNamara will be retained, and with the Teals, we think Goldstein could be in doubt. In New South Wales, we think we can win Bennelong, but it's a very thin margin, it's only 0.1%. And so that's paper thin, and with Gilmore and Patterson, we're hoping but unsure. So that is, so finally, knowing that the big shifting factor in this year's election is the political turmoil in the United States, it's unnerving, it has consequences for us. Better the devil you know is Labor's subliminal message. It's effective, subtle and hard to counter. If Labor does win, then we might well say, in Trump we trust.
Gerard, thank you very much indeed, and it's a great honour to be here speaking with Mary, who, along with Michael Easson, have carried the flag for reasonable centre-based parties within the ALP for a long time, and I pay tribute to both of you for your long and distinguished service. I also want to acknowledge my great friend Michael Yabsley, who's here tonight, a former distinguished minister in the Greiner government, and it's great to see Michael. Gerard, it's over 30 years since I last addressed the Sydney Institute. I did a Zoom a couple of years ago, but 30 years since I've been in person, which either means my last speech was so good, Gerard and Anne thought that just can never be topped, or the alternative was it was so shocking that Gerard thought, I'm not having him again. But I do want to point out my unbounded admiration for the Institute and Gerard and Anne Henderson. Having been around when Gerard was famously the architect of the campaign to change the industrial relations system in this country in the mid-80s, you cannot underestimate how important the Hendersons have been, and Gerard obviously in particular, to Australian political history. And this institute has been incredibly important. No one chronicles Australian political and social history better than the Hendersons. And for those that haven't read Gerard's extraordinary book on Pell, The Media Pile on Collective Guilt, it is an extraordinary piece of work, as befitting the Henderson family, where, as try as the left might, they didn't even bother to write a proper critique of the book because it was unblemishable. And as with everything the Hendersons write, so Gerard, it's a great honour to be here. And perhaps another 30 years until I'm here again. There was a party years ago called the Natural Law Party, for those who remember, whose main policy was to reverse the ageing process. But they didn't last. When we look at the 25 election, we have to cast an eye on history. We all know the last time there was a one-term government in this country, because we've all been reading the papers. The reasons for the defeat of the Scullin government are well known. Less well known is that both Ben Chifley and John Curtin were defeated at the 1931 election, came back and both became Labor Prime Ministers in the 1940s. Scullin's defeat was at the 13th Australian general election, and on Saturday week we'll be voting at our 48th. The 34 elections between Scullin's defeat and Saturday week make interesting reading. Lyons and Menzies led the UAP to 4 wins in a row. Chifley and Curtin then won 2. Menzies, Holt and Gorton won 9. Whitlam then 2, Fraser 3, Hawke Keating 5, Howard 4, Rudd Gillard 2, Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison 3, and thus far Albanese 1. Labor's record since 1931 is 2 two-term governments, 1 5-term government, and Albanese. So what does all this mean? To take Mary's point earlier, that person that approached her in the street and said, 3 years, he's only been there 3 years, I may as well give him another go. That is the prevailing wisdom in Australian politics amongst the voters. They don't like to admit they got it wrong so quickly. We're a fair go nation. For goodness sake, they even go Gough 2 terms, and that shows you the extraordinary generosity of the Australian public. But look, there have been so many polls, without repeating the analysis that Mary's gone into, much of which I agree with. There have been many elections where the polls have been underestimated, and been wrong. The Conservative vote is underestimated. Think Trump 16 and 24, Scott Morrison in 2019. My favourite poll, by the way, is what they call the neighbourhood poll. There was a French guy during the US presidential election that won, was it €90 million, betting on the American election. And they said to him afterwards, how did you pick Trump as the winner? How were you so certain that Donald Trump was going to win? Because some polls said he'd win, some said he'd lose. It was 6 of one, half a dozen. But you were in no doubt. And he said, yeah, I use the neighbourhood polling method. And they said, what is that? And he said, well, I get my pollsters to say to people, not who are you voting for, but I get them to say to people, hey, who do you think your neighbours are voting for? Oh, Trump, the bastards, they're all voting for Trump. So he used the neighbourhood method, which is a very effective method, and it was correct on that occasion. For a long time in Australia, the polls have shown that the Albanese government has not been considered a great government by any means. Federal debt has never been higher. They've lost control of immigration. The cost of living has seen a real crisis develop in our suburbs and our towns. Interest rates are hurting working families. Social cohesion is at its lowest level in my lifetime, with the shocking rise of anti-Semitism its most poignant example. Our national defences look weak. Our energy industry looks like a disaster. Crime rates throughout the country are at unacceptable levels. In addition, domestic violence continues to be the scourge in our country. Many young people are afflicted by mental health issues, and of course housing is beyond the reach of record numbers of young Australians. It is therefore little wonder that the Albanese government was behind in the polls for so long. So the question is, what has happened so far that has changed the polling from what looked like a Dutton victory, an assured Dutton victory, majority or minority, to now the polls on this Thursday, 9 days before the election? Why do the majority of polls have Albanese in front? If they are correct, proven on Saturday week, the reason is probably this, and this is how I boil down the political dynamic at the minute. Eras change, issues change, politicians change. But for me at the minute, the golden rule in politics in Australia is this. If a federal election is fought more on social issues, care economy issues, then Labor will do better. Because that's their brand equity, dating back to Girton and Chifley. If the debate in the election is more on economic matters, tax, then the coalition do better because that's their brand equity and has been for 80 years. Hence Albanese's run to grab hold of any Medicare sign he could find and put it behind him. He wrestled this campaign early and quickly onto his favourite topic, which is not that Medicare is being sold, because they tried that one, very successfully I might add in 16, to it has to be improved now. There are secret cuts and it's still going to be slashed and burned by Dutton, even though he hasn't said he's going to do that, but scaring the public, right? Intimidating the public, preying on the elderly, the vulnerable, the sick, that somehow Peter Dutton will put your healthcare at risk. And so Albanese successfully early on wrestled this debate away from the economy and tax and debt onto social policy, as Shorten did in 16 and almost won. And in 19, of course, remarkably, Bill Shorten decided to campaign on the Liberal Party's number one brand equity, which was tax. So he played an away game on Scott Morrison's home venue and got turned a certain victory into a defeat. These are the brand equities that matter in election campaigns. So if Albanese is to win, and there's no certainty of that, that I think is the reason. When Labor run all these negative campaigns, they're signalling a darker Australia. It's not built on hope, but that old line in politics, it is built on fear. Slashing and burning Medicare, slashing and burning school funding, hospital funding. Dishonest, but that's what they're doing. Mary's analysis is pretty much, I agree with. The coalition is competitive in 3 seats in Western Australia. We might say we're in front of Bullwinkle. Mary and polls might say it's 50-50. There's 3 in Western Australia that are in doubt. There's 1 in South Australia. There's 3 in Queensland. There's 3 in New South Wales. There's 5 in Victoria, and there's 1 in Tasmania. If in the last 9 days the pendulum goes back towards Dutton, he could clean all of those seats. If it stays the way it is, it's arguable that Albanese will win will get over the line in a minority government. But anything happened in the last 9 days, and let's hope it does, because I don't think Australians want the next 3 years to be like the last 3. Let me just say a couple of other things to finish, because I don't want to repeat Mary's analysis. I think Peter Dutton has been an incredibly impressive opposition leader. He's had some very successful people behind him. He certainly united the opposition like no other leader in our lifetime. I'm sure Gerard would agree with that. He's had the courage to stand up for nuclear, realistic goals in immigration, a substantial housing policy, a strong alignment with Israel, opposition to anti-Semitism, a vision looking forward to tax reform when the budget ultimately permits. He's had a courage to stand up to those divisive racists who supported the Voice campaign, and I think that's his internal credit. If he wins on Saturday week, I've got no doubt Dutton will be an extremely successful Prime Minister. There's a lot more to say, obviously, about the Teals and the Greens. The only thing I want to say in finishing is simply this. It defies belief, doesn't it, that Mark Dreyfus, seriously, he's given preferences, number 2 to a Green. And Albanese's given his second preference to a Green, Hannah, someone who he said he didn't know anything about her. Okay. He's given her number 2. For a machine man like Albanese, he spent all his life in the New South Wales Labor Party. He knows who's running against him, for goodness sake. He knows exactly who she is and exactly that he's giving her the preference, because he's done a deal with the Greens on preferences. This Greens candidate, thanks to the Australian newspaper who point all this out, that Greens candidate accused him of complicity in genocide. She said, you are complicit in mass murder. Albert said, I don't worry about that, have my number 2 preference. I must say, maybe I'm heartless, but I can't imagine giving a number 2 preference to someone that said of me, oh, that Kroger fellow, he's complicit in murder. He gave the number 2 preference. I think Albanese's position on the Middle East has been appalling. I think Australia is divided as I've ever seen it. Started with a voice. There's an anger in Australia, in this community. It started with a voice. It was echoed for different reasons at the Opera House, and it's got worse ever since. Not to take action against people that closed down the Prime Minister's own office, threats to the Jewish community, etc., that's unforgivable. On that ground alone, Albanese deserves to be defeated.
Yeah.
Well, many thanks to both our speakers who've kept to their time and been entertaining and informative, which is not easy to do. So they both come up here. We've got about half an hour questions and discussion. Everyone keep their questions or comment short, and away we go. So I just start off with a general question, and then I'll disappear over this way. I mean, could it be that Australia's moving to the left in a number of issues? Because what we've seen in recent times is any promise to increase expenditure seems to be acceptable, any cuts seem to be unacceptable. Our foreign policy has shifted in the last 3 years without any great opposition. There's been opposition from certain areas, but and generally we seem to be much closer to the Whitlam years than we were to the Howard years or the Hawke-Keating years. So has there been a change, or is this just the Trump effect lashing our shores, which may well go away sometime later? So, quick response from both of you, and then we get to everyone else.
Well, I certainly hope the pendulum goes back. I think it's. I think Albanese has run a government where he has let Penny Wong be in charge of foreign affairs, and she has chosen to play it the way she has. Now, I'm sure she had some reasoning behind it, but as I say, at the end of the day, it's ended up by, you've got Muslim voters voting against Labor, and you've also got Jewish people voting against Labor. So you have to say, is it the brightest tactic? I wouldn't have thought so. But as to whether it's gone to the... Well, yes, under this government, we do have a left-wing leader. Having said that, I do honestly believe that Albanese has been appalled by the anti-Semitism. No, listen to what I'm about to say. However, I think his government has been too slow to do anything about it. The suggestion of having an envoy against anti-Semitism, they knew about that 6 months before they did anything. Unforgivable. I think there's I suspect it's not... It just seems to me that there is a process in getting things done in government these days that is not as good as it was 30 years ago when I was there. There's just a lot more restrictions on how you do things.
Mary, I'd like to agree with your comments on Albo. If that was true, he would have accepted one of many invitations he's received to appear on Sharri Markson's show.
No, he doesn't have to. He's been with the Jewish...
He doesn't have to, but anyway. Gerard, I tend to think this. Over the last 60 years, the left have been much more active than the right. The left are running 1,000 campaigns. There's not one part of Western society that isn't under attack or question from one or more left-wing organisations. And now it's a matter of trying to push the tide back, which is very difficult because they are institutionalised and very rigid. The ABC, probably the best example of all. Their defence mechanisms are very strong. They've built a firewall around them to fend off governments that try and talk about balance. Secondly, I'd simply say that in relation to brand equities, the coalition ultimately, perhaps not in this election, but in due course, Debt will have to be at the forefront of a campaign. Australian governments can't continue to spend $35 billion a year at a federal level, more than they're earning, well beyond the forward estimates. There's got to be a point at which debt has to matter. That, of course, falls into another Labor trap, which is, your secret cuts. You must have secret cuts if you want to cut debt. The constituency for debt has gone in Australia. People tend to think, I didn't run it up. Everyone seems to be indebted overseas. It'll just be passed on to the next generation. But as long as I'm not affected, it's a bit more debt, doesn't matter. Sooner or later, that will need to be confronted.
Okay, it's a question.
Thank you for this, your presentation, both Mary and Michael. I think you're right. There's been a march through the institutions, and it's been dominated by the left, and it's been indoctrinated to our children in our universities and schools, such that 1 in 4 would not defend Australia in a war, so the latest surveys say. Michael, taking your last point, that a coalition, notwithstanding Albanese has denied it, we know will become about if there's a minority government. What do you and Mary see as the worst outcome of a Green ALP government?
Mary thinks it won't happen. Over her dead body. It depends how the numbers fall. He's got to get supply and confidence somehow. If he ends up with 70 seats, 68, he's in trouble. He'll need the Greens. If he ends up with 72 to 74, he probably doesn't. If he could get away with not having the Greens, he'd prefer not to have them for obvious reasons, but he may well need them. The answer is it'll just be, if it happens, it'll be a cascading increase in anti-Americanism, move towards republicanism. At a foreign policy level, it'll be a more Whitlamite foreign policy. At a tax level, well, obviously capital gains tax discount will go from 25 to 50 or 60, whatever. Negative gearing will be limited to 2 or 3 houses, whatever. Tony Burke will run rampant again with more industrial relations changes. It'll just be continued decline in how in this country ultimately GDP will decline. We'll have more people from Gaza, obviously, because we're a very compassionate country. We don't need all those security checks. It's just unnecessary.
Look, I think the Greens have become too extreme, and as a result, I think they just have no credibility. And politics also has a side of a jungle about it, and I just think you'll find that the Greens have got themselves into a position that Labor's not going to give them a hand. It's just not going to happen. Whether other deals get done will depend, as you say, on the votes, but they could look at some of the deals or they could look at independents. They've got quite a range. There's going to be a lot of crossbenchers. That's the point. It doesn't have to be with the Greens. So they're not our natural home.
Thank you very much, Michael and Mary, for your presentations. I enjoyed them immensely, so thank you for providing them. My question is about the teals. Yeah. They've been mentioned in passing in your presentations. How do you see their fortunes faring second time around, particularly after the public having seen them in government, in Parliament for 3 years?
It's a very good question. Teals, not universally, but historically tend to increase their vote the first time they face re-election. Cathy McGowan-Indi, Rebecca Sharkey-Mayo. So on the one hand, you think, because they're more well-known, they've prattled on about all the incredible things they've done in the 3 years, these 27-page booklets of Gumph, all these things they're alleged to have done. There are enough voters out there who believe this stuff, think, look at all the things they've achieved, it's amazing. Etc., etc. It's all care and no responsibility. They're not really subject to much criticism because they don't have to defend their party, etc., etc. So the independents have a massive institutional advantage over Liberal members and candidates and Labor members and candidates. So I'm just hoping that Monique Ryan loses, who and Amelia Homer is an outstanding young woman. She'd be a great member. Monique Ryan, I don't need to say any more about. I'm really hoping my friend Tim Wilson wins in Goldstein. Allegra Spender is the favourite to win here, but I just have a simple rule. If you signed the letter calling on Wong to start funding again to UNRWA, you should never be a Member of Parliament. You are profoundly ignorant, if not dishonest, but you are, for me, you are statute barred if you are stupid enough to sign something like that.
Very well. But the point is, Michael, that apart from yourself and others on Sky TV, where is the debate amongst the politicians? Where it certainly didn't come from Labor, and it really hasn't come successfully from the Liberals as well. So it's only those of us who listen to Sky TV get a certain point of view, but the other public don't. They just accept that as though, oh, it must be true. It's unfortunate that the level of debate, it does come down to the talent in your team at a given time. Unfortunately, I think Monique Ryan, it's been suggested to me that she may hold on. I hope she doesn't. But that's the only one I feel very strongly about. And as for in Goldstein, Zoe could be in a bit of trouble, but maybe she'll get through. I don't know.
Okay, there's a question there, then I've got one here.
The campaign's been a disaster for the Liberals in the sense that I think Peter Dutton lacks personality. It's okay to be up. I think he's quite well schooled in his policy and what he wants to do. The campaign has allowed it to dribble out rather than the 5-second grabs that cut through. They haven't organised that. But after all of that, why is it still looking like it's close? When you assess, Mary, those seats that Labor will win or hold, it's still borderline slim. I mean, with the polls the way they are, I'd expect Labor to be winning with a 20-seat majority. So what's holding it back?
Well, it could be that it does win with that majority. I mean, that's what I'm not prepared to say it here tonight, but that's what they're telling me. They think they can win in their own right. I doubt it, and I'm just too sceptical because we've had too many polls that, you just can't be sure of. So I'm not saying that. But do I think do I think things are coming back towards Labor? Yes, I do. Can I identify why I think that should be happening? And I only come back to what has happened since November of last year to change this, and it's Trump. That's the only thing. And is it talked about? No. So I think it's this underlying thing of people feeling anxious and insecure, and therefore, oh, well, we'll stick with him. We're not sure about the other bloke either. They're just... part of the reason of it being boring, dare we say, is that both candidates, and we've made it a presidential campaign, it's all, if you're a Liberal, all you hear is Dutton. If it's Labor, all you really hear is Albanese. So you've made it between those two leaders, and neither of them are what you would say, at this stage, exciting personalities. They're not like past leaders. So it then comes down to, well, who do you like better? I mean, I know it's not what you'd like to believe. You'd like to believe that every election the right thing happens, etc. But I just think in this environment, I suspect that this is what is happening, even though we don't see it. It's only that we're reading in the polls. We don't sort of see it. I don't know about whether you see it with the people you mix with, but I don't see this great move to Labor, and yet it appears as though it's coming back.
Yeah, just quickly. Look, he's a first-term Prime Minister, as I said, and people want to give a first-term Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt, as they did in 1974. I don't think people think Albert's particularly good. He was behind for a long time in the polls. There's all those issues that I've mentioned that people acknowledge are problems. It's just that he grabbed that Medicare sign. By the way, I've said on Sky a few times how outrageous it is that Albanese appears in front of the Medicare sign. which is a trademark of the Commonwealth Government. Isn't the Medicare sign owned by the Commonwealth Government? So I said last night, why hasn't the head of Medicare rung the National Secretary of the ALP and said, can you stop misusing our trademark because you have no permission to use it for Labor Party campaigning purposes, which I thought was a reasonable point to make. However, the good news is there's no problem. The head of Medicare has come out today in the newspapers saying there's no problem, People who want to use the Medicare sign for legitimate purposes and promote health, blah, 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 it's not a problem. Right.
Okay, I've got a question here from one of our Zoomers, an economist, Dimitri Bernstein. He's talking about what Michael spoke about, the Labor strength against the coalition strength, and he's talking about the coalition strength. Why have not the coalition tried to fight on economics rather than replicate Labor policies and propose their own economic ones?
Well, because in a cost of living crisis, it's very difficult to take away benefits from people who are struggling. I mean, at the centre of this election is this. People cannot afford to put food on the table by lunchtime. There are many families in this country who get up at 8 or 9 o'clock thinking, where am I going to get money to buy food for the kids? Or pay the school fees? Or buy them new clothes? That is a powerful theme right through the whole of the country. So Labor at a political level, to be honest, are exceptionally good at lying about these secret cuts, these $600 billion. I mean, it makes you sometimes think. It makes you think sometimes that you need truth in advertising laws for election campaigns, but that infringes free speech. But the reason is because the climate is not conducive to significant budget cuts, because the social fabric of the nation is extremely delicate.
That's very true. Can I say I've been polled 3 times in this election, twice on the telephone and one on the phone asking me to put in answers like text number 1, 2 or 3. And this question was there, this was only yesterday, which of the following issues is most important to you in deciding how you will vote at the next federal election? Cost of living, inflation, cost of housing, interest rates, the economy, jobs, healthcare and aged care, education, environment, climate change, or immigration. I'm not casting my vote on any of those issues. And I suspect, I don't know for sure, but I suspect it was probably a Liberal pollster. But it's just that we're being told what the issues are. And the truth is you can have views about foreign policy, about defence, about all different sorts of things, and no one is really, well, even though the Libs, I acknowledge, have done something with defence, but, after polling has started, it's timing is the issue.
Look, the point is that if all those seats that we talked about earlier are in play and swing back to Peter Dutton, he can easily get to 70 seats and with some independents get to 76. He can form government. If you read the 52-48 poll and you believe that's true, then Labor will be re-elected. But there's a lot of people around that think that Conservatives don't like telling pollsters who they're voting for. It's the same old, the shy Trump voter effect. I well remember the 19 campaign, whatever TV station I was on the night of the 19 election, we all turned up. I was sitting at the table with Stephen Conroy and a couple of others, and before we went on air, people were saying, how many short and win by? 6, 8, 4, whatever. No one on our panel, off camera, thought Morrison had a hope. It was completely over. And that was at 6 o'clock on election night. So, you never know. There's a shy Conservative voter effect throughout the Western world, and it's been seen time and time again, and 19 is the best example. So, if Labor think they're over the line, which I'm sure they don't because they're smart enough to know that that's a mistake they've made before, they may find another thing coming.
Michael, my question's to you, really. We know what Mary thinks about President Trump. We're about to find out what the Canadians think of President Trump. I think their election's on the 28th of April. It looks, at the moment, like the Liberal incumbent government might be saved by what's happened there. What role do you think President Trump has played in the way things have perceptively shifted.
I agree with Mary. It's played a negative role as far as the opposition's concerned, for all sorts of reasons. Even though Dutton's never met him, Rudd's got no access. We know all those arguments. But it's played a negative role for the coalition because Trump is seen as a conservative, apparently, and we are centre-right. So we're more closely aligned with the Republicans than the Democrats, and that's probably the main reason. I know it's been a negative here, and a lot of the things he's done have impacted people's thinking here. For example, what he's doing on the Ukraine is appalling. It is utterly appalling. I mean, what is this guy thinking? This is not a make it up as you go along type of job. He's got it. This is not on the job learning. But what a performance. I mean, I think that guy Zelensky is an absolute hero. This guy who's got no weapons, a small country, invaded by a superpower, he's kept up this fight for 3 years. He's scrounged whatever he could from those very generous, those powerful European nations who are there right behind you, the French, you can always rely on the French. This guy Zelensky, to me, is one of the heroes of our generation. To see Trump belittle him in the White House and then again today, I think that's shameful. I think it's not helping here. It's not helping here. But look, to be honest, you got to look at issues in terms of what affects me most as a voter. I may not like Trump, whatever, but I'm more concerned about I need an extra $20 for lunch. I need to put petrol in my car. I need my Medicare card. I need to get my kids a house. Like the urgent domestic priorities, I think, always trump those things. So when people say, oh, the Trump factory, this and that, yeah, they're issues 7 and 8, in my view.
Okay, I think this is the final question.
This is a bit frivolous, but following on from Anne's comment about Peter Dutton's appeal, charisma and appeal may be superficial, but they're very important. And I can't help wondering what the Liberals' fate might have been with Josh Frydenberg as their leader.
Absolutely. I think Josh was a very good guy, and I was sorry to see him lose his seat. But with so many of these things, I think the average Australian is very much turned off by Trump and the way Trump is operating. I'm not saying Trump hasn't got, in terms of the Middle East, he's actually taken some decisive action, but I'm not sure that the average Australian likes him and what he's doing. An American may think differently about it. I'm sure there are poor people there who think it's still great they've got Trump, but he's prepared to do so at the expense of world allies. And that causes us then to think, well, can we rely on him? Is he going to be with us? As Josh is not there and isn't a candidate, then you have to deal with what you've got. And as I say, I've met Peter many times, and he's a very pleasant individual. But the question is, does that relate to the electorate? And if it doesn't, then the Liberal Party will have to look again. And that's when I think it brings in the issue of the pool of talent that you have.
I spoke to Josh last night, by the way. He's in good form, enjoying. He's in the Gold Coast, enjoying a family week away. By the way, the answer is we don't know. But look, I must say I don't know Peter Dutton all that well. I've only met him a few times. He doesn't have Malcolm Fraser's charisma. And Malcolm won 3 elections.
Well, we've been running just close to an hour, so we've got to stop here. But I'm just going to be very brief and say a great performance to both of you tonight. It's good to have two people, one vaguely on the Labor side, one vaguely on the Coalition side, or perhaps who were honest enough to sort of break across the party lines and give quite independent comments. And on reflecting, it's really a pity that people of the calibre of Mary Easson and Michael Kroger didn't get into federal politics, in your case for longer, and for your case not at all. Because what you showed tonight is substantial political skills, and we'd love to have you back. But for tonight, well done and thank you.